Jerusalem, city of thrones, the blood of your people still darkens the stones. City of sorrows, spread on a hill, bride of the prophets, they dream of you still.
On the Tuesday before Jesus' crucifixion, we're talking about 3 days before the painful death that Jesus knows is coming. He shows incredible stamina and creativity. First, he's within the Jewish temple. He answers the doctrinal tests that are foisted upon him by his enemies. Then, he tells 3 parables aimed at the treacherous scribes and Pharisees. Then he pronounces 7 different condemnations of the hypocrisy of the scribes and the Pharisees. We call them the 7 woes. But that's not all. Still on Tuesday, Jesus and the disciples walk to the Mount of Olives, where they have an excellent view of the temple, overlooking Jerusalem and the temple. Jesus answers his disciples' questions about that city and the end times. He must be exhausted. Nevertheless, he finishes that long Tuesday by telling 5 more parables as warnings against the sins of omission. For home fellowship tonight, let's focus on Jesus' prophecies in Matthew 24, 3 through 41. I think these enigmatic prophecies are best listened to from a Jewish perspective. The disciples are Jewish. They're in a Jewish city. They're talking about the center of the Jewish religion. Matthew, the writer of the book we're learning from, is Jewish, and he's writing primarily to a Jewish audience. Here are 2 Jewish friends telling us just how important it was for them to realize that the Gospels speak from a Jewish perspective.
When I opened the New Testament, I was expecting to find a handbook on how to persecute the Jews. My grandparents had warned me that it was written by people who killed the Jews. That's what I was expecting to see, and yet when I'm opening it, I'm reading a story written by Jews about Jewish people. The New Testament was a fascinating book. And so as I opened this book in the library, I kind of looked around, made sure that none of my friends had seen me taking a Christian Bible off the shelf. And I open it, here's the first sentence. It says, "This is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham." So 3 people are mentioned, and they're all Jewish. I was very shocked. And as I continued to read, I'm reading the story of a Jewish man who was born in a Jewish village, in a Jewish country, and one day walks into a synagogue and announces that he is the Messiah. The more I read the words of Jesus, the more I became attracted to him. It was as beautiful as anything I had ever read in any other part of the Bible.
Finally, she persuaded me. She said, "Look, start reading in this book, the New Testament." And I opened it. I was a little nervous opening, but I started to open, and I was amazed. I started to read about Yeshua, Jesus, and I was shocked to find he was Jewish. I didn't know he was Jewish. I didn't know the disciples were Jewish. I didn't know that the whole thing was Jewish. I thought, wow, if this is really true, if Jesus really is the promised one, the Mashiach, if he truly came to be the kapra, the covering for the wrong I've done, my eyes began to open. And I started to realize there was a barrier between me and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, between myself and God. I'm not holy enough, I'm not righteous enough. And if that can be taken away, then maybe I'll know God.
Let's try a Jewish perspective on one detail from Matthew 24. Verse 31 says, And he will send angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of the heavens to the other. This gathering of the elect should remind us of the gathering of the church, which we often call the rapture or the resurrection of the just. But I don't think Jesus is talking about the general gathering of the church here. I think it's narrower in scope and refers to the gathering of the Jewish elect, particular Jews who come to Jesus during the period of intense tribulation and anti-Semitism right before Jesus' second coming. Does that make sense to you? Once again, let's review the reasons why we should use a Jewish perspective when we read Matthew 24. In verse 3, the disciples ask about the destruction of the Jewish temple. The teaching takes place on the Mount of Olives, which is the best place from which to overlook that same temple. Verses 4 and 5 refer to false messiahs as a primary concern, and a messiah is a Jewish concept. Verse 8 predicts the travail of Israel. Verse 9 predicts anti-Semitism. Verse 15 refers to the desecration of the temple that concerns Jews specifically. Verse 16 refers to the fleeing of Jews from Jerusalem. And verse 20 talks about the challenge of traveling on the Sabbath, a particular challenge to Jews. So as we study the prophecies of Matthew 24 tonight, let's try to maintain a Jewish perspective.